Welcome to the finale of Unreleased 3DO M2. I'm going to cover the rules, then jump right into it. The rules for inclusion are simple. There has to be some proof that the game was in development, be it an article in a magazine, known copy of a prototype, a retail order sheet, an interview with a developer, etc. With that, let's get started. This is Retro Impressions, Unreleased 3DO M2. Another unreleased video series? Another Return Fire game. Return Fire 2 started life on the M2 and was announced as a launch title. The original game was released on the 3DO to great success, so it wasn't really a surprise to see its sequel slated for the new system. Like most games deep into development on M2 hardware, the cancellation of the M2 meant no other system outside of a PC could handle it without stripping down the intended experience. Return Fire 2 has remained a PC exclusive, and it's a bit unfortunate because it was highly praised when released. Road Rash is another game announced as a launch release, and to be honest, it would have been a shock had it not. The game was insanely popular and ported to just about every console under the sun. It was a motorcycle racing game with a brawling element that started on the Genesis, but is best remembered for the amazing remake released on the 3DO. A game so good, it's often cited as a must-own for the system that defined how licensed music was used and later expected in certain games. Rock'n'Roll Racing is a vehicle combat racing game that has become popular in recent years, due in large part to it being developed by Blizzard Entertainment and a port of the game being released on Nintendo's Game Boy Advance in 2003. This was around 1 year before the release of World of Warcraft, a game that would help shine a light on Blizzard's early works. Even though it's clear Blizzard maintained the rights to the game, Interplay developed the sequel for the PSX with a port planned for the M2. It remains a very obscure game with little coverage or discussion taking place. While FIFA was fairly well known across the world going back to the mid-90s, there was another association football series that mostly remained in Europe and was also very popular. Games from the Striker series seem to release on just about every console possible, including the CDI and 3DO. So hearing about a version in development for the M2 isn't exactly shocking. While the Panasonic version has never been seen, versions of the same game were released on the Saturn, PSX, and PC. American Laser Games was a company that only made on-rail shooters with full motion video backdrops. In the early 90s, these games were extremely popular with titles such as Mad Dog McCree, Who Shot Johnny Rock, and Crime Patrol selling like hotcakes and being the subject of enthusiastic discussion among gamers. As the FMV fad began to wane and sales slumped, American Laser found itself in quite the situation. By continuing to make the genre of games the company was founded on, it would undoubtedly bankrupt them. So a new division within the company called Her Interactive was created to focus on something new and hopefully profitable, while American Laser tried to refocus the company as a whole. The new arm of American Laser would focus on creating games to strictly target and be marketed to young girls. The first release was a dating sim that happened to rely on American Laser Games' FMV tech, keeping it closer to its roots than their later titles. The game called Mackenzie & Co., along with Philips' unrelated Girls Club on the CDI, were some of, if not the only, Atome genre games available in the US until releases from Japan started seeing localization in 2006. For those who don't know, Atome games are essentially women looking for men dating sims. A recent popular example of this is Hatoful Boyfriend, though you're dating pigeons rather than people, but it's the same idea. While American Laser's side project of Her Interactive was seeing success, work on a new non-FMV game was well underway in hopes of maintaining the company's legacy. Shining Sword was an open-world 3D action fantasy adventure game started in 1995. A number of screenshots, storyboards, 3D renders, and information including a detailed story were released for the game as American Laser did something unique and documented its development process online. Unfortunately, it was too little, too late. In 1997, American Laser laid off a third of its staff after announcing strong financial losses, with less than 50% of the revenue generated in 95 being netted in 96. Her Interactive would be spun off as an independent company and would in turn acquire the assets of the fledgling American Laser Games after they closed. Digital Leisure acquired the rights to all American Laser games in 2000 and have released remastered versions for some of them. It's unknown who owns the rights to Shining Sword or if we'll ever see some form of it in the future. As of this video's release, Her Interactive remains active, still developing games targeting young girls, with their most notable release being their long-running Nancy Drew series. There's not many 80s movie game franchises more fascinating than Top Gun. On a budget of only $15 million, the 1987 movie would go on to gross more than $356 million. Ocean Software, who specialized in games based on movies, acquired the rights to most of the home and microcomputer platforms that were currently on the market. However, they weren't publishing games for home consoles at the time, so that license went to Konami. Most people don't know about Ocean's game, but everyone who grew up with an NES knows about the one by Konami, as it sold over 2 million copies. A decade after the movie released, Spectrum Holobyte picked up the rights to develop a series of Top Gun games. Their first release was called Fire at Will. It was visually stunning and utilized actors from the film, but it wasn't well received. As launch games for the M2 were announced, Top Gun was listed among them, and it was made clear this wasn't the same game as the one just released on the PC. In fact, the game planned for the M2 appeared to be exclusive to the system. The assumption is Top Gun Hornet's Nest is that game, and with the cancellation of the M2, it was moved back to the PC, where it failed to impress critics and was a commercial failure, ending Spectrum Holobyte's run at the series. In the mid-90s, Konami was experiencing major success with their arcade light gun games. So much in fact that 2 of the 5 games they released on official M2 hardware were light gun games, trying to find success by keeping close to other similar and popular arcade releases. Total Vice is another rare release with only a handful remaining in arcades worldwide, making information regarding it scarce. As with Heat of 1198, this game has almost no documentation or videos online outside of 2 that were recently uploaded, including one by Igor Stellar. A more in-depth look at the game, including a full playthrough, was uploaded and released at the same time as this video by Video Game Esoterica. He was actually kind enough to supply this footage, and I highly recommend you check out his channel, as it gives a deep dive into these games that's really well done. It's a bit crazy that 2 people are responsible for the only video footage of 2 publicly released high-budget games, but here we are. These guys are heroes. Anyways, Total Vice was made in the same vein as Konami's super popular Lethal Enforcer series, but here you play as a modern-day cop who is hell-bent on taking down a number of gangs and their leaders. The consensus seems to be that this is a great game, but there aren't any real in-depth reviews out there, as almost no one has played it. As with all M2 releases, it remains unported. In the mid to late 90s, it seemed like everyone was trying to take a piece of the sports game pie. Interplay was pushing a new line by VR studio Gremlin Interactive called VR Sports, with planned releases for baseball, football, golf, and soccer on the M2. They all received a release on the PSX, with some of these series continuing on for some time. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot else to say. One of the biggest questions I've had over the course of this series is why Panasonic felt they needed to own the M2 hardware when they had 0 games in development. Out of every known piece of software for the system, they had 3 demos developed in-house by their small Wondertainment game studio, and that's it. In addition, they acquired distribution rights for 2 Midway games, the 2-on-2 hockey game I discussed in part 3, and War Gods. I always found it a bit odd that War Gods was brought home, considering it was mostly panned by critics and performed poorly in the arcades. Yet a year later, it was in development for the M2, PlayStation, N64, and PC. As you might expect, a game people hated in the arcade performed equally awful with its home release. Why Panasonic contracted to bring this to the M2 as a launch title is mind-boggling weird. Wing Commander was an insanely popular series in the early 90s, resulting in a number of games, a TV series, card game, movie, and book series. The game series was a space combat sim, with the first and third game receiving a 3DO port. Wing Commander 4 was released to critical acclaim on PC in 1996, with a port to the M2 and PSX announced shortly after. The M2 version was intended to be a launch title, but no other information has surfaced regarding it. That's it for Unreleased M2. There are a handful of other games I didn't mention, but beyond a title and developer, I couldn't find any information, making it rather pointless to chat about. The only other game worth mentioning is Power Crystal, but it's going to be part of a special short documentary I'm working on, so I've decided to wait until then to showcase it. I'm looking to cover the Atari Jag soon, but is there another system that you would be excited to see on Unreleased? If so, let me know in the comments and let me know what you thought about this series as a whole. That's it for now. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Feel free to leave a positive or negative comment letting me know your thoughts. If you would like to chat or keep up to date on channel related news, follow me on Twitter at Jenovi. And until next time, you've been watching Retro Impressions.